Hi there. An important skill in academic writing is being able to take things that other people have written and integrate them effectively into your own text. So you already know that sources are important for providing support and evidence, but how exactly should you incorporate this source material into the flow of your writing? That's what we're going to look at in this video. In earlier videos, we looked at ways to bring material from the source text into our writing. So let's recap that now. We have quoting, paraphrasing, summarizing, and generalizing. Quoting is when you use the exact words of the author. Paraphrasing is when you don't use the author's exact words, but instead express the author's idea in your own words. Summarizing is when you want to bring in a broader idea from the source, so not just a sentence or two, but perhaps describing a major overall idea of a journal article or book. And finally, generalizing is when you make a point that is supported by several sources. So now we're going to look more closely at each of these. When you quote, you copy the source words exactly and you enclose them in quotation marks. So quoting may seem like an easy way to integrate sources. However, there is a key ingredient that students often forget, and that is that you must integrate the quote. So that means that you must explain to the reader why your quote is relevant. A quote isn't a replacement for your own words, it's support for your own words. So you should treat a quote as a piece of evidence, and that means that you should show why it supports the point that you're making. So let's think about how we might do this. So here is a sentence from a source text, and I want to quote this in my own writing. I can integrate this quotation into my text by providing a little run-up or a lead-in. This indicates the relevance of the quotation to what I'm writing about. The run-up provides a kind of frame for the quotation that enables me to embed it into the flow of my writing. So the bottom line is, you shouldn't have quotes from sources just floating around in your writing. They need to be integrated properly. You can also take a longer quote and shorten it by missing out a part if you need to. You do this by adding a ... in place of the part that you've removed. Normally, we enclose this ... in square brackets to show that it's not part of the original text. It's very important to keep quoted material exactly as it's written in the original. However, occasionally, we may need to make some minor adjustments to fit the quotation into the flow of our own writing. For this, we use those square brackets again. So in this example, I've selected a slightly different part of the sentence for my quote, and this means that I need to make a minor adjustment to keep the sentence grammatical. So I've put the adjusted word into square brackets to show that it's been changed from the original text. Now let's look at paraphrasing. With paraphrasing, it's true that we need to express the author's ideas in our own words. However, students often focus purely on this idea of using words that are different from the original text. They then think it's sufficient to just go through and change each word for a synonym, but that isn't really paraphrasing. Paraphrasing something requires that you first process and understand the idea, and then you can effectively rephrase the idea yourself and integrate it into your writing. So, taking our quotation from earlier, we might paraphrase it as follows. As you can see here, we haven't just swapped out a few words, we've actually rephrased or reformulated the idea in a new way. So, you might be wondering, how do you choose whether to quote or to paraphrase? Well, it's only really necessary to quote when it's helpful to reproduce the author's exact words. Other than that, paraphrasing actually gives you more flexibility to foreground the most important aspect and integrate it into your text. So, quote when the exact words matter. Otherwise, paraphrasing is a more flexible way to bring in material from sources. Now let's look at summarizing. Summarizing is actually quite similar to paraphrasing, but the idea that you're paraphrasing is broader than just one or two sentences. So let's take the same article from our earlier example, except instead of quoting or paraphrasing a specific passage, we're going to summarize the overall idea of the article. Here's how that might look. Lastly, to generalize across sources, you can use phrases like "several scholars agree that," or "many authors have argued that," to introduce the idea, and then include the citations for several different articles in parentheses. In the examples we just used, notice the use of certain verbs when we introduce our sources. These verbs describe what the author or the source does in various ways. These are called reporting verbs. So here we've got arguing, noting, and agreeing. Now, in normal everyday conversation, when we report what someone else has said, we tend to just use the verb say, like John says that he will be late, or John said that you would be late. However, in academic writing, we don't use says or said. Instead, we use a wider range of verbs that express more precisely how the source relates to our argument. So apart from argue, note, and agree, we could also use claim, state, indicate, propose, suggest, and so forth. Some of these verbs, such as note, state, and indicate, are fairly neutral. Meanwhile, verbs like argue, claim, and agree highlight that the source is putting forward a point of view rather than just stating facts. Then we have verbs like propose and suggest, which show that the author is leaving some room for possible disagreement or discussion. So, when you're using reporting verbs, make sure to carefully consider which verb is the most appropriate to express how your source relates to what you're writing about. In summary then, when you use sources in your writing, whether you're quoting, paraphrasing, summarizing, or generalizing, it's important to integrate your sources properly. In particular, quotes shouldn't just float, and paraphrasing should show understanding. And whether you quote, paraphrase, summarize, or generalize, consider your choice of reporting verbs. Reporting verbs can be really effective in conveying precise information for your reader about exactly how your source supports the point that you're making. That's all for this time. See you next time.